My multimedia project is going to be on how the body and the brain communicate. The brain and the body, specifically the spinal cord, communicate through these three tracts: the dorsal column medial lemniscal tract, the anterolateral system, and the corticospinal tract. The first one that I want to talk about is the dorsal column, and it looks kind of like this. It's split up into two tracts, which is the dorsal spinal cerebellar tract and the medial lemniscus. To this tract, there is an upper and lower portion. The upper portion is called the fasciculus cuneatus, and it controls the upper body movements. The lower half is called the fasciculus gracilis, and it controls lower body movements. Now that we know what the DCML looks like, what does it do? This pathway is a descending tract, meaning that it communicates outside sensory information to the brain. Specifically, the DCML senses fine touch, vibration, pressure, and most importantly, proprioception, which is your body's ability to sense its position in space and movement. Next is the anterolateral system, and it looks like this. Some important landmarks on this system are the thalamus, the medulla, the anterior spinothalamic tract, and the lateral spinothalamic tract. The anterolateral system, like the DCML, is also an ascending tract. This system senses pain and temperature. These two systems, the DCML and the anterolateral system, use three sets of neurons to communicate. First is the first-order neurons. Sensory information from the body enters the spinal cord through the dorsal root ganglia and travels up the dorsal columns. This then communicates to the second-order neurons. These neurons cross at the medulla oblongata to the contralateral side and ascend as the medial lemniscus. Lastly, they communicate to the third-order neurons. In the thalamus, the fiber synapse onto neurons that travel to the somatosensory cortex in the parietal lobe. Here's a graphic of what that looks like. There are the first-order neurons, the second-order neurons, and the third-order neurons. The second-order neurons are at the medulla, and this is the site of decussation. The third-order neurons communicate to the postcentral gyrus, also known as the somatosensory cortex. An important thing to note is the anterolateral pathway contains the anterior tract. This does not cross over at the medulla. This crosses over at the spinal level of innervation. The last tract is the corticospinal tract, and this is what that looks like. Some important landmarks here are the medulla, the spinal cord, the lateral corticospinal tract, and the anterior corticospinal tract. This tract is different from the DCML and anterolateral tract because it is a descending tract and not an ascending tract. This means that it carries motor signals from the motor cortex to the spinal cord. This allows for voluntary movement and fine motor control. 80% of this tract will decussate at the medulla, but 20% will not. When a certain side of the spinal cord is injured, this allows you to maintain a little bit of communication between the brain and body. Thank you so much for listening, and here are some of the citations that I used to complete this presentation.